Our opening keynote with Mr. Steve Shelton.
Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it. I feel a little self-conscious now because this hat clearly clashes with my outfit. This is well intended, but I appreciate it. So, as Matt mentioned, my name is Steve Shelton. I'm the founder and owner of Greenshoe Consulting. We focus on researching, educating, and helping individuals and organizations with stress and burnout. And it happens to be a bit of a challenge in our industry. So what I want to get into is this concept that you can't pour from an empty cup. So the idea that when we are grinding ourselves down throughout the year, whether it's in cybersecurity, in our sales role, that aspect of grinding ourselves down means we're losing energy and the ability to show up as our best selves, which has a very large impact on our lives. So first, I want to just share some gratitude with you. I travel all over the country, engaging with and working with cybersecurity communities, individuals, departments, and I want to let you know the level of engagement and activity in this community is very uncommon. The fact that you have individuals who care about you individually, who care about the industry and the community, and they go out of their ways to do work to actively engage, pull you together to do things that they don't have to do, but because they care about you and the industry is a big deal. So I want to acknowledge that first. And so for Matt, for Aaron, for Anthony, if we can give them a round of applause just for their efforts to bring this all together and make this happen, I appreciate it. And I also want to express my deepest gratitude for the opportunity to share the space with you all today. So talking about this topic is not a historically mainstream topic because it's not gotten a lot of mind share over the past several decades. However, we all know and experience the challenges of being under significant stress, being exhausted, being challenged by wanting to get up in the morning, because those things take a toll. So to be able to have a space to share this and talk about this with all of you, I greatly appreciate. And I will also acknowledge that this is not just a cybersecurity topic. For the vendors that are sponsoring, I carried a bag for 17 years and was on that side of the practice, and I know how much stress and burnout goes on in that industry too. So this is for everybody in this space. So with that being said, what I'd like to ask you to do, since most of you don't know me and don't have a relationship with me, part of the challenge is having some rapport and trust. So what I'd like to ask from this community and for this space today and tomorrow is that you engage. By engaging, I'm not asking for you to delve into and share a bunch of private information. What I'm asking is that you share your most precious resource, which is time, but also your imagination. So what I'm going to do is I want to start off with a story that I think explains, at least illustrates the challenges that we all face. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to imagine being in or seeing a rainforest. If you're like me and you've never been to a rainforest, I'll give you an alternative. You can think of a forest or the woods and just imagine it being a little bit more humid and more wet, and there's more animals and critters that can kill you. Fair? So if you'll join me on this, what I'd like you to do now is imagine a colony of ants, army ants to be specific. This colony of ants live with a strict sense of duty and unity. And their jobs, their lives are just a ceaseless amount of activity. They never stop, right? But there's a full hierarchy to this army of ants. You've got the queen at the top. The queen has some guardians and protectors. We also have soldiers, foragers, and scouts. And so our character that we're going to pay more attention to is a forager ant by the name of Zara. Zara is known for her unwielding dedication to the colony. She cares so much and focuses so much on her job that she gives everything every day to that job and to that community. And so on this particular day, the ants are going to set out on their mission to go forage and find food for the colony. They know the mission, they know what's ahead of them, they know what's expected of them, and the way that they stay in line and conduct everything in their colony is through pheromone trails. Pheromones are chemicals that are released by ants so that way they can smell and sense the ants around them, and that trail allows them to follow the ant in front of them. So if you can imagine being in this rainforest that was behind me, and it's no longer there, but if you can imagine being in the rainforest and seeing this trail of thousands upon thousands of ants marching in order, following one another, but something happens this specific time that they're not prepared for. So what happens is a torrential downpour. Rain starts coming down, and the water starts mounting up on the floor of the rainforest until it starts to turn into streams that have strong currents. Now, as the ants are marching through the rainforest, Zara is about halfway back in the formation. Well, the rain comes through and sweeps through right in front of Zara, wiping out several of her ant brethren and leaving Zara and her ant colleagues helpless, confused, and uncertain as to what's going on because they just saw their friends get swept away, and now they're waiting helplessly as the water continues to rush by, blocking their path. And as Zara and her friends are standing there, they see the ants ahead of them disappear off into the forest. Now Zara and her friends are stuck waiting and uncertain as to what needs to be done. They haven't been trained to respond to this type of challenge, we'll say. So what happens is that as Zara and her colleagues are standing there, helpless, confused, they start to think about, what does this mean? Automatically, they go into fear mode because of the fact that their job has been explicitly taught to them that they are supposed to follow the pheromone trail of the ant in front of them so that way they can go get food to bring back to the colony, to protect and serve the colony. The challenge then becomes they can't smell the pheromone trails of the ants that have left them. So Zara and her friends looking around, uncertain of what to do, Zara thinks she picks up a pheromone trail. She then starts to move in that direction to try to hunt that pheromone trail down, and the other ants start following her because they pick up her pheromone trail. What ends up happening then is that they end up walking in a large circle. So what they thought was the correct path ends up being what we call a death spiral. They start walking in an endless circle. More and more ants start filling in until the pheromone trail is so strong that nobody realizes that they are just locked in a loop that they can't escape. So they continue walking in circles after circles until they're exhausted and march themselves to death. The challenge here, had there been any ant that strayed from the path, waved them down and said, hey, we're not going in the direction that we need to go. Maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing. Unfortunately, those ants don't have, and that typically does not occur. So the challenge then is that much like our involvement, this relentless march mirrors a different kind of spiral experienced in our industry. Like Zara and her fellow ants, we often find ourselves caught in a loop. The demands of the job, coupled with the fear of missing a critical threat, what that means to us personally and how that impacts not only us but those that we care about, drives us to work longer and harder. Burnout creeps in as we push ourselves to the brink, just as the ants march tirelessly in their death spiral. The signs of burnout, exhaustion, cynicism, a decline in performance are just like the ants' gradual weakening, as they march tirelessly. For the ants, a random disturbance or a stray ant breaking the trail might be all they need to avoid that death spiral. Taking breaks, seeking help, redesigning work environments, and fostering a culture of values, treating each other as humans, is what we need in order to prevent our own burnout loop. So the concept that I'm going to propose to everybody is much like Einstein says, the thinking that got us to where we are is not the thinking that's going to get us to where we want to be. In order to be different, we have to think different. And I specifically like this picture of Einstein because my memory of Einstein is more of a serious facial expression, not as much as this playful, having fun type of expression. So this aspect, to me, correlates with the concept of we need to learn to take our craft seriously and not ourselves. So, why am I here? I mentioned I served the industry as a salesperson for 17 plus years. I worked for big companies like Symantec and RSA and Proofpoint. I worked for startups like Avanan, who's now with Checkpoint. But I've been in the space for quite a long time. I've experienced and struggled with my own aspects of stress and burnout. It's a big reason as to why I left the industry. But I also witnessed a lot of people suffering and struggling with significant stress and burnout. So I left the industry a few years ago to do something that I thought would be more fulfilling, having an impact not only on myself, but others in the world around me. So I left to become a sports psychologist, of all things. Played football through college. My high school experience was the idealized experience of learning character development, life skills. Leaders lift each other up. No one is above or below anybody else on the team. And we are stewards of the school, the team, the school, and the community. Stewards leave things better than when they found them. That high school environment was the most amazing environment in terms of what we were able to achieve with the talent that we had. I know for certain we were not expected to achieve what we did during that time, but it was the most amazing experience in terms of feeling fulfilled, connected, like I mattered, like I belonged, and that I was good at what I did. I went off to college thinking everybody's experience was like that, and then I got to college to find out they didn't really care a lot about those things. They cared more about performing. They didn't care about what might have been getting in my way of performing. Either perform or get out of the way. My corporate experience was much more like my college experience of I don't care what's going on with you mentally or emotionally, do the job or get out. We'll find somebody to replace you. So the challenge is understanding how do we break those patterns in those cycles. I believe that emotion drives everything in our lives. The idea that when we have a thought, and I'll expand on this in a second, when we have a thought, we attach emotion to it and feeling to it immediately. We create meaning to it. That meaning dictates our decision and how we're going to act or behave. Most of us know this intuitively. The challenge is that we get wrapped up so much in our day-to-day environments. Go, 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 do, that we don't take the time to breathe and reflect on whether or not what we're doing is in alignment with who we are. So as I mentioned, I believe that better people make better leaders, and effective leaders understand how to influence themselves and others to action because they understand how humans work and the things that shape us, which I'll get into in a second. The other aspect of this is that we believe, because of science-backed research, that performance breakthroughs and breakdowns occur because of three primary things, as I mentioned. What we focus on, the meaning that we apply to that focus, and therefore the action or behavior we take because of that meaning. So there's two main components or life skills, lessons, whatever, that I want to share with you that really drive a lot of what we do. So one is the science of achievement. Everybody in this space has, to some degree or another, an understanding of what the science of achievement is. Based upon the work that you do, you know what good work looks like in order to get a promotion or a raise. You understand how to effectively sell. You understand conceptually how to perform well. The challenge is when things get into the way and how we respond, as I mentioned. But for most of us, and this is where I'm going to ask for some engagement, a little participation, the art of fulfillment is not a part of the equation for us. Fulfillment comes in the form of appreciation and contribution. It is selfless. So for those, if you've ever set a lofty goal and achieved that goal, who here has ever experienced that and then thought to themselves, is this all there is? Show of hands. Quite a few. So the challenge is when we achieve something, we think we achieve it alone. There's only so much we can feel alone. But if we're going to achieve anything amazing, it takes others around us to be able to do that, right? So the idea here then is, how do we start connecting into that? Well, as I mentioned, what shapes our future is our decisions. So from a very simplified view, again, the idea here is that what we tend to focus on automatically will apply a meaning based upon emotion or feeling, and then that dictates the behavior. So for example, if you have ever been really pissed off, so angry that you wanted to punch a hole through the wall or throw something, just been so pissed off, and then somebody you care about comes up to interact with you, what type of interaction do you typically respond with when you're in that state? Does it lead to a stronger relationship and more engagement and connection? Because you're able to turn it off and be like, hi, how are you? I'm totally fine, nothing's wrong with me. That's not how it works, right? If you're pissed off, you're like, what? What do you want? Right? That doesn't create a response from somebody else that they feel like they are in a position where you want to hear them or see them or interact. So the challenge then becomes, how do we become aware of how we are in the moment so that way we can show up, adjust if need be, and perform the way that we want, which is as our best. So part of that is understanding these challenges. Part of that is understanding our own mental and emotional state. So in that moment, if you are so pissed off that you can't take it anymore, I sound like Hulk Hogan a little bit right now. Matt got me excited. Yeah, brother. So if you are so pissed off in that moment, what's your body feeling like? Are you relaxed? Are you light? Shout it out. If you're angry, do you know how your body responds? My dad, when he gets pissed off, his face gets flushed red. That is a clear indicator to me that it's probably not a good idea to talk to my dad in that moment, right? I get really tense. I lock in. So when we understand these things, that is a cue and a signal for us in the moment that, am I in my best mode or do I need to adjust? So first thing that impacts our state is that in the moment state, physical, mental state of being. The second one, which is a really, really hard one, this takes work to get after, is our map of the world. So if anybody's read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, I know that's an older book. I'm dating myself, I understand that. Still holds true today that our map of the world, the way that we perceive the world around us, most likely is not 100% accurate. Because of our background, our experiences, our beliefs, there's a variety of things that lead and create our map of the world. Unfortunately, sometimes that evolves for us, sometimes it doesn't. It won't evolve if we don't look at what is actually leading into our map of the world. So the challenge for us is to understand how we do some work to really connect into the things that drive us. And before I get into that, I wanted to show you this. It's a little far away. From a psychology standpoint, we use this a lot. It's called the feelings wheel. I promise we're not going to talk about a ton of feelings, but the idea here is that if you can see the 7 primary feelings in the middle of that feelings wheel is essentially the default feelings that we all have, the primary feelings. Happy, angry, sad, fearful, disgust, surprise. I may be missing some, but the idea is that 70% of those feelings that are primary are negative. Our brain, through 2 million years of evolution, is programmed so deeply to scan the environment for any threats to our safety and well-being. Therefore, 70% of our default primary emotions are negative, meant to protect us and ensure that we're not being harmed or damaged. If that's the case, our operating system needs some updating because we no longer have a saber-toothed tiger out in the wild trying to kill us. Today's issues, threats, and fear factors, whatever you want to call it, the threats to our well-being and safety are people's judgments, expectations, and opinions. And I'll say that again. Today's threats for us are people's judgments, expectations, and opinions. You can see this proliferating already through the children in today's society. Teenagers, younger kids. Kids no longer want to step into leadership roles out of fear of being persecuted, bullied, and being out in front away from the herd. That has ripple effects into corporate America because now there is research showing that there are fewer and fewer people wanting to take management roles, leadership roles, because of that similar mentality. So, in order to identify and understand our map of the world, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So this pulls from human needs psychology, this pulls from some Carl Jung components and a bunch of other stuff I'm not going to bore you with. But the idea is human beings have 4 dominant needs that everything that we're doing, we're trying to fill those needs. The job that you have, the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, the house, the neighborhood you live in is all based upon and driven by these 4 needs. The first need is a need for certainty. We need to be certain, we want to be certain, that we are safe and secure, that our neighbor is not going to come in and break into our house or kill us, that walking down the sidewalk, another pedestrian is not going to attack us. We have that need for certainty. And that comes in various forms in terms of how people address and fulfill that need. It could be the money that you make, the size of the house that you have, the types of food that you eat, whatever it is. There's a variety of ways that we fill those needs. Unfortunately, if you lived a life where every day was the same and you were certain from the moment you woke up until the time you went to bed that everything was going to be the same, how would you feel? Pretty bored, right? Be bored out of your mind. So the idea then is that we also need variety. We need things to surprise us to feel alive. So show of hands, how many people like surprises? I would argue you like the surprises you want. The ones you don't want, we call problems, right? So this mindset in terms of what is that thing? Is it good or is it bad? is a big aspect of this. But then the third thing that we need is love and connection. Community. We are tribal creatures. If you don't believe me, try talking politics all day long today and see how many people are on your side or not. This is the most divided we've been, and I argue it's largely due to tribalism and that being infatuated or bolstered up at this point. But the idea that we need connection. We need to feel a part of the tribe. We need to feel that we have people that we can lean on when we need help. And love. And the last one of the four main needs is significance. We all need to feel like we're special, that we're unique, and we have some value that we can offer. The last two in the human needs gets into growth and contribution, which is more of a spiritual need. Spiritual aspect, I don't know about all of you, is not something that I ever talked about, maybe 1% of my time in corporate America, but it's a big aspect of all of this. So growth being the first aspect of this, we all have a need to feel like we're growing, that we're evolving, we're getting better, and that we're not complacent or stagnant. If you're not growing, you're dying. If your relationship is not growing, it's dying. If your business is not growing, it's dying. So then focusing and investing time and effort into that is a necessity. The growth comes into or flows into contribution. Having something of value to contribute to others, to something bigger than yourself, to being selfless, giving and not taking. That leads into our ability to be fulfilled. So continuing off of that, there are a lot of things that take our focus away in this industry on being able to focus on the things that really matter because it's so reactive. There are so many things outside of our control as cybersecurity professionals, as salespeople, as everybody a part of this industry, that if we allow our focus to go to the things that we can't control, we're going to be frustrated, angry, pissed off, and not our best. So behind me, there's a few things I want to point out. One, the numbers represent a study last year, a survey by Heidrick and Struggles, which is an executive placement firm. They do an annual CISO survey. Last year, the survey says 71% of the CISOs are concerned for their own personal health in regards to the significant stress that the job puts on them. That's up from the prior year. Over half, nearly 60% of the CISOs are worried about burnout and its impact on them personally. Do you know what the standard tenure of a CISO is now? I got a 2. It's actually just under 2 years now. It is not a livelihood of longevity as a CISO. So the challenge is there's not a lot of research and data from a CISO standpoint. And the further challenge is if you're in the SOC, if you're in incident response, those are two of the other highest stress and burnout areas in cybersecurity. And ironically, a lot of the roles outside of that are as well. So the challenge is getting awareness on these things. But then outside of those numbers, we have a variety of things going on. We have an economy right now that I would argue and show that it's twice as expensive now than it was 5 years ago for everything. In turn, it's harder to sell now and do your job as a practitioner because companies are cutting back on their budgets. How many people, show of hands, know somebody that's been laid off in the past year? It's a lot of people. So that fear and uncertainty over layoffs occurring, trying to find a new job, and it's harder now than it was 5 years ago to find a new job. In addition to the fact, you have, thanks to Uber, now a big liability in regards to if the CISO is liable for a material breach, whatever the hell that means now. There's more risk as a CISO. So that, in addition to artificial intelligence, which I want to talk on, lead to a big challenge. I'm going to skip that. So the idea here, thank you very much. I want to show you this to lead into the next thing. The idea here is that stress has gotten a bad rap. Stress carries a negative association with it. But there is some form of stress every human being needs in order to take action. It's called eustress. Eustress is the positive stress, right? You got a new job, you're going to get married, you're working on a new project, whatever it is, whatever motivates you and excites you, that type of stress is good stress. The challenge is that each one of us has an ideal amount of stress that makes us feel energized, focused, and challenged. Show of hands, how many people here have actually understand what level of stress is their ideal zone of operation? We got a couple. I dig it. But a vast minority, right? Every one of us has an ideal amount of stress that makes us feel like we are in the ideal state, which I'll call flow state, where you're so locked in and engaged with the task at hand, time fades away. You're so locked into it that you feel positive, you feel good, you feel energized, and decisions just come to you. You don't have to work for the decision. Somehow they just appear and it's the right decision. That state is a beautiful place to be. The challenge is when we prolong that stress and try to maintain it for too long, when we grind and we don't recharge. We then start going to the other side of that spectrum where we start to feel fatigued. We get into that death spiral, so to speak, that loop that Zara got caught in. So the idea is we need to understand what our ideal state is from a stress standpoint and notice when we are starting to hit that fatigue and then take action to recharge. What this leads to is engagement. I've been using that word since the start of this talk. The challenge is a recent report by Gallup, or poll rather, shows for every nearly 2 people or engaged employees, there is at least 1 disengaged employee in that organization. We have roughly 400 attendees here today. So if we apply that same amount to this, you're roughly looking at 100 to 150 disengaged people in this audience that don't like you, they don't like their manager, they don't like their job, and they kind of have an attitude of take this job and shove it, right? The impact of that, engagement leads to productivity, it leads to better work, it leads to better employee retention, it leads to less safety incidents, it leads to more profit. So we're stuck in this weird mode, in these patterns, thinking that we have to cram down and press and put more pressure on in order to get people to take action. And I have some expectations or beliefs as to why that is, but pressure isn't going to make diamonds in this environment. Pressure is actually going against engagement and profitability and productivity. So what we need to look into then is how do we break that cycle and loop? Let me jump forward. So before I get into that, I want to share one more thing. 3 weeks ago, I was in Milwaukee at an ISSA chapter meeting. They had someone there presenting on AI and cybersecurity and the impact. He went through these next couple of slides, and it scared the shit out of me. I'll explain why. So one, by show of hands, how many people think social media is an addictive substance? Pretty much everybody, right? I would argue we have not caught up to the challenges of social media, and a lot of it is exposing the fact that most of us do not train the skills to manage our mental and emotional states, understanding who we are and what we want to be, and utilize social media to help those means. It's actually going opposite of that. So the challenge here is that this is a picture from NVIDIA and the GPUs that they create. The small chart there, if you can see the major escalation, is the processing power. So the advent of machine learning allowed us to process a lot more data, a lot more faster. Show of hands, how many people here are using an AI engine of any sort? I will admit I still use Microsoft Word to keep track of my notes. I'm old school, but I'm starting to change my ways because of the fact the amount that can be done, the amount of time that can be saved from remedial work and to empower other work is unreal. So what that chart was showing is that over the past 2 to 3 years, the processing capabilities have skyrocketed. What that means is that if we're going to the next slide, from a quantum compute standpoint, what would take 10,000 years for a supercomputer to compute can now be done in 4 minutes. That is bananas. That amount of processing power and capability, most people in the general public have no concept of what that means and how that's going to impact them. So that AI component is going to be a massive, massive disruptor. It's already here. So I'm curious, I want to show of hands for this also. How many of your companies are having discussions on how AI is going to impact their employees? That's awesome. From what I understand, there's a lot of companies that are not in the same situation. I'm glad to see so many hands going up. But this is something that AI is already here, and we don't fathom what's coming down in very quick order. So to have those conversations is one of my asks from this talk, is that we need to be able to look out for one another, have these conversations to communicate how are we going to remain engaged when things like this are disrupting our ability to engage. So that for one. The other thing I want to bring up, and this reinforces my focus and my mission for what I do. Does anybody know what this is? You got some nods? Right on. So Apple got approved a patent for brain-computer interface. Show of hands, how many people have AirPods? A lot of people. So what this shows is that there is now technology that is in use that is able to pick up brainwave frequencies to allow you to use your brainwaves to do things on computers without using your hands or fingers. It's Jedi mind stuff, right? So what this is Apple will be coming out with AirPods that have multiple detectors to pull in your brainwaves so that you can choose in your brain to switch songs. You can increase, decrease the volume. You can play podcasts, movies, whatever, by just thinking about it. It'll do it on your phone and laptop. The reason this scares me so much is because of the fact the work that I do is I help people understand who they are and what is getting in their way mentally and emotionally. If you are not prepared and don't have the skill set to manage and regulate your mind and your emotions and know who you are, how many people would expect hackers would like to hack into these things and exploit them for their own means? Yeah. So if hackers like to hack stuff and that's hackable, wouldn't it be possible then to utilize that in the reverse way and inject thoughts like from advertisers on what you might want to buy, what things that you already like, because our phones don't already pick up our conversations, and then magically on Facebook there's advertisements for what we were talking about, right? So conspiracy theorist in me says there's a good chance that companies and people could use these brainwave emissions the opposite way to project things into your mind. If you don't already know how to guard your mind, this could be very, very dangerous. So I'm glad to see so many conversations going on. Now, as I mentioned, the thinking that got us to where we are is not the thinking that's going to get us to where we want to be. So what do we do about it? The first thing I'm going to suggest, if you could read this quote, is that through burnout research, the most common comment that came up when asked what would help most in preventing burnout, workers' most common response was, I wish I had somebody that I could talk to safely and privately. This aspect of having somebody that you can go to that is going to be confidential, they're not going to judge you, they're not going to give you shit or make you feel bad for what you're experiencing, thinking, and feeling, but it's just to be able to offload that stuff has profound effect. And I'm not saying you need to go talk to a therapist, but there are trained professionals that understand how to utilize psychology and just listen and give you space. So what I would challenge you and encourage you to do, I mean, I'm a big, burly former football player. I'm a pretty tough, mean guy, but I love talking to somebody. I had a big mafia fascination, so a consigliere, the counselor of the family, was essentially that. Yeah, you probably don't want to kill that guy. You're probably just having a bad day. Take a step back. It's okay. Take a breath. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out, and there's a variety of folks that I can recommend if you'd like to reach me afterwards. And then Einstein's full of great quotes. I'm sure everybody knows this. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Our industry has been operating in the same way over and over again for decades, and there's been no ant to come to the group of ants and say, hey, maybe we want to rethink what we're doing because I don't know if we're on the right path, right? So let me be the first ant to raise my hand and encourage the other ants to join in. So we need to understand who we are, what drives us individually, as well as organizationally, to make the changes necessary to integrate and perform our best and find value in what we do. What I didn't get into, because I was trying to save time, but I love MacGyver. You can build anything with a paperclip, right? But this idea that for most of us, if I was to ask you, what security project, what security initiative are you not able to do right now, and why? What answers, what gets in the way of doing the initiative or the thing that you want to be able to do? What do you have? Resources, budget, people, the buy-in, whatever it is, right? These are all perceptions of resources or a lack thereof. But I would challenge you in that thinking differently, is there a way to utilize your resourcefulness, which all of you have, your problem solving and critical thinking, in order to find different ways of doing? You have to. But the biggest resource that we all have that we cannot get back is our time. So our challenge right now is that with our lovely cell phone devices, our laptops, is that we have not gotten to an understanding on how to manage our time effectively. The lines and the boundaries have been blurred, and many people feel not able to set boundaries with their business, their leaders, or whomever in order to take time for themselves. And that's where we get to filling up our pitcher, is really understanding how do we do that. Because I'm curious, there is data showing that 46% of workers in the United States are not taking their paid time off. And, Matt raises his hand, over 52% report working on PTO. Show of hands, who's ever worked on their PTO? Everybody for the most part. I've done it, you've done it. It's not a good idea, but we feel this insatiable need to keep doing. The challenge then becomes, the research shows we need to recover. If we're expending all our mental and emotional resources, how are you going to be able to perform? How can you pour from an empty pitcher? The challenge here is that when I talk about recovery, specifically rest, what do you think of when you hear you need to rest, you need to recover? What kind of rest do you go to? Sleep, right? So the idea being sleep. However, new research over the past few years is showing that sleep is not the only kind of rest that we can get that will charge us like sleep. There is something called wakeful rest. Wakeful rest gets into reading. And I'm not talking about reading cybersecurity manuals. I know we all love that. But it's really reading fiction. Wakeful rest gets into this concept of feeling like we have distance from work. We have some separation. We have our own space to be our own person. So that aspect of reading, watching TV, walking in nature, reconnecting with what it means to be human, and having a hobby. Matt's got a ton of hobbies. Wrestling, fishing, CloudConning, all kinds of stuff. So the idea is these are things that will help us be able to fill that cup back up. Unblurring those lines, setting boundaries, finding ways to reconnect with ourselves, to have fun, to understand our passions. So with that, I'm going to announce this for the time being. So to play and continue off that idea of wakeful rest, how to recharge, how to reinforce those boundaries, Greenshoe Consulting is going to be launching a new thing, a one-day event on a Friday from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., somewhere within an hour drive, to where you can come, you can check in, you'll be totally taken care of and provided for, but it's an opportunity to network with others in your industry, to learn how to recharge, to reconnect, as well as work on any challenges that are getting in your way. So we're going to look for 20 leaders. CISO, ideally, VP, director level would be great. We want to set this up as a POC, so to speak, so that way we can work out the bugs before we deploy. We're not going to send an automatic update. I don't know if anybody's picking that up. But we want to be able to put together an event to where you don't need to leave your personal life and your families. Hence, it's Friday, so you can take PTO. But you're going to come to this property, have meals prepared for you, have specific skills you're going to learn, and the ability to disconnect and recharge. So if you're interested, please come see me. We've got breakout sessions throughout the day, which gets into the next aspect. I'm going to wrap up with this idea. I'm going to skip that. So the breakout sessions we're leading today and tomorrow. Understanding your decision-making framework. What are the values and the principles that guide your words, thoughts, and your actions? We're going to get into understanding an aspect of self-awareness, which is the first key component in leadership. My belief is that we all need to be leaders in our own lives and not be the Zaras that don't know how to respond and adapt and overcome. We're going to get into effective communication to reduce stress. Communication is a very challenging thing. And then imposter syndrome. If anybody, and I think you're human to be dealing with imposter syndrome, if you've dealt with this, we're going to go through what it is, how to address it, and a skill to manage and minimize and alleviate imposter syndrome. What's your why? To go through adversity, to have the motivation and the passion, especially if you've been doing a job for a long time, it's easy for us to forget why we're doing what we're doing. What motivates us and drives us in this industry, in your job. And so the idea is understanding and reconnecting into that passion. And then finally, how to refill your cup. As I mentioned, wakeful rest is a big aspect of that. Boundaries is a big aspect of that. But if you want to come in to learn, how can you have something that you can go to after leaving that session that you can implement now to start generating more rest and recovery? That's what we're going to cover. So with that, I say thank you. And I'm going to ask that as you go through today and tomorrow, that you allow yourself to not act like Zara the ant, but the empowered leader and beautiful creature that you are. Step outside of your comfort zone, meet new people, experience new things, and thank you for coming out.